sometimes some of these women have like the cleanest diet ever. You know, they never touch sugar, they don't drink alcohol, right? Like their diet is pristine, and really you can tell that's not the issue. So in those patients, that's when I would start thinking maybe there's a problem with mercury.
Think about specific patients, of course. Heavy metal or toxins related to a BV Candida situation. Could you talk about it?
Yeah, so recurrent bacterial vaginosis and recurrent candida, so vaginal thrush. If it's not recurrent, if it's this one-off situation, we're usually not really concerned. If it's recurrent, we either look at diet, meaning, you know, generally a high carb diet, lots of alcohol, lots of sugar, lots of fermented foods. All of these things can feed dysbiosis, or basically an imbalance in the organisms in the intestines. That would be my go-to. And honestly, 80% of the time, it's enough and we get somewhere and it's great.
If you already eat very healthily and you still are suffering from bacterial vaginosis or candida, what are two possible areas to explore? The first is a hormonal cause for bacterial vaginosis or candida.
The cleanest lifestyle ever. And she was perimenopausal and had been put on Livial. It's not HRT, but it's a common drug now to treat hot flashes. And after trying a few other things, I told her to maybe experiment coming off Livial. And indeed she did. And it just completely resolved her problem. So I think it was affecting her vaginal flora in some ways. Candida loves estrogen, right?
In this case, it was easy. She basically suggested that her patient go off a hormonal therapy and immediately problem solved. The next is intestinal toxic load, which can be related to mercury overload. So listen very carefully because she's going to explain some intricate details. Just 1 minute of your time.
There's also a small subset of patients with these types of recurrent problems where there's an intestinal load that we just can't seem to resolve. So that's where we would think of maybe mercury exposure, or SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So anything that will slow down digestive transit will make it harder for the right bacteria to grow in there. So if a patient is taking things like prescriptions for sleep, certain types of antidepressants like Prozac or Valium, those drugs that can slow down digestive tract, they can make it harder to treat BV or thrush because now more bacteria just sits there. So sometimes there are these things that get in the way that it's harder to work with because a lot of times patients do need those prescriptions as well. But assuming they're not on these types of prescriptions and they've looked at the other obvious things, then I would test for mercury because I've seen it a lot of times feed basically fungal organisms in the digestive tract and impinge the immune system's ability of getting rid of them.
So mercury is food for fungus, which causes perpetual candida.
Yeah. Basically, it seems to be how it's really interesting. For example, they've studied that, say there's a factory that was dumping some kind of pollutant in a river, and now they're trying to clean up their mess. And we've realized that there are certain types of plants and seaweeds and so on that like these types of toxic environments and are actually used now to process these toxins and make the environment cleaner again. And same thing with certain types of bacteria. So although we don't fully understand it, clinically, we're starting to see that this kind of chronic thrush or BV, it seems to be that certain types of bacteria just like this environment, like a high mercury or possibly other environmental toxin, right?
Anything that slows down your intestinal transit is not going to be helpful. It could be bacteria overload, it could be mercury toxicity, and as she explained, it also could be drugs that slow down intestinal transit. You heard her. She said, if there's no hormonal reason, if there's no bacterial overgrowth, if there's no drugs slowing down your intestinal transit, or you do not have any bowel issues like constipation, consider testing for mercury.
Like this environment because remember that the body is detoxifying a lot of these environmental toxins at the intestinal mucosa. So it's like pumping out these toxins in the digestive tract, right, where there's a whole bunch of bacteria. And so in that environment, it'll be friendlier to some of them, which will tend to proliferate until they become a problem.
My takeaway is to first test for any cause of hormonal imbalance, and next to test for any cause of bowel disturbances, and that might include mercury. Catch the rest of the Detox series with Sigrid, where she covers arsenic toxicity, and she also shares why doing heavy metal testing may be one of the easiest and clearest ways to uncover complicated diseases like BV and Candida.